I would like to start first saying that I'm very happy together with Christina, who is our efficient rapporteur, to run this last but not least panel. Just to briefly introduce a bit the debate, I would like to share with you a number of key insights from a global survey we've just done that aims at measuring the impact of the sharing economy or the usage of sharing economy platforms on the consumer and travelers' experience. And actually, if we just consider strictly the viewpoint of consumers, and I repeat, strictly the consumers from viewpoint, the survey really say that it's a kind of a success. Because depending on the city, the regions, we consider that between 10 to 25% of international visitors use at least one of the sharing economy platform during the stay. It's a broad definition, so including accommodation, transportation, etc. And maybe probably that's one of the key learning as well. It tends to impact positively the quality of experience. So people using this type of platforms tend to be more satisfied than average visitors. So we are talking about something like 150 million of international visitors using this peer-to-peer economy. Now we're talking about satisfaction, and one of the reasons why people are actually satisfied. Sorry, so you don't see this nice picture. One of the reasons why people are so, let's say, delighted with this type of collaborative platform is just because of that. Actually, if I just click here, I have a kind of Uber driver waiting for me in 2 minutes. I can book my, experience in the visit meal tonight in a few blocks away from there. So from a visitor point of view, this is kind of a, so cool, so easy to use that. It's digital, so it's kind of magic. But, of course, there is a but. Because behind the magic, there is something happening as well. When you are just one click away from an experience, when just, looking for a booking through this kind of a super easy, super cool application, actually you do not really realize about, the price. Is it a fair price or not? When you click, you are one click away from your Uber driving, you can't really realize who is going to be paid. Really, you don't imagine if there's an impact about fair or unfair competition. This whole digital is fostering satisfaction, but it also kind of hiding a bit the reality, which is much more complex. If we look a bit, the whole stakeholders around this sharing economy. So because of that, because of this digital platform fostering satisfaction and fostering the easiness of usage, there are lots of questions behind. It's the same. You see this car, Uber car, approaching, so that's a wow effect. Wow, look at that. He's just becoming there. He's just approaching. But if he's approaching, it's because you are geolocalized and you don't know actually what Uber is doing with, they know everything about where you are, etc., etc. But there are lots of things which is hidden a bit by the super digital experience. So we're trying to address a bit of that, talking about, liability, talking about possibility of using data or not, talking about the digital platform, should they or not be part of resolving the, let's say, hidden conflicts between this new revolution happening. And to do that, we have a great panel, so I will present briefly each of them before the talk, but I can honestly say that we have the best panel because it's perfectly balanced males and females. We have people from the private sector, public sector, associations, and actually we have in front of us two birds like that, yes, I will explain. We have a serial entrepreneur. We have somebody who's a big fan of Tom Hanks, and we have actually two guardian angels. So to start with, I will explain further on. John will take the floor. John is, let's say, if I had to tweet about John using some hashtags, I would say hashtag UNWTO, hashtag tourism trends, hashtag forecasting, hashtag Dutch living in Madrid. So he's a big expert in trends and statistics. Head of that activities at WTO. And John, the floor is yours. Please take 5 minutes, no longer, to explain a bit your say about that economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Olivier, for introducing me. Well, that's what's already said about me. Then a little bit about the organization I represent. I'm very pleased to represent UNWTO here. I hope you all know what UNWTO is. We are an intergovernmental organization in the UN system, the United Nations system, dealing with tourism. It's not me or our secretary that's UNWTO, it are our members. And our membership consists of 157 countries, 6 associate members, and those are all governments. And we also have, and that's quite special for United Nations, we have some 500 affiliate members. They are connected in this big platform for talking about tourism. And those affiliate members represent private sector, educational institutions, tourism associations, and local and regional tourism authorities. With regard to, well, the sharing economy, we don't like to call it sharing or collaborative economy. We rather talk about private tourism services through digital platforms. Because often it's not real sharing. There is real sharing, but that's only a minor part of it. We have prepared a discussion paper, and we are conducting a survey, and actually we hope to send out the survey in the coming week. And our survey is aimed at destinations for taking stock to what extent the private offer through digital platforms is an issue in those destinations and how they have been dealing with it so far. And we do that worldwide. Our mandate is with all our member countries, and those are in 5 regions of the world. And I think also what we hope to contribute is that so far the discussion has been very much focused on Europe and North America, to also bring that perspective a little bit broader. And we identify very clearly 3 stakeholders. We have private providers, we have the digital platforms, and we have visitors. And we know that in the private providers, they are by no means new. We have seen them all along history of tourism. In the past, people used to rent out rooms in the season. They put up a nice little advertisement outside, and you went there and you could rent it, or they put a classified or whatever. Digital platforms also have some history already. The first digital platforms we can think of are the GDSs in the 1970s, 1980s, which was basically B2B for airlines. Then with the internet, we saw the online travel agencies entering, taking over a lot of the business that formerly was done by brick and mortar agencies. And that has been moving to the offer of private providers as well. And also the demand, if there has been offer, demand also have been there for a long time. If only that a lot of people, the first time they travel, in the past used to be visiting friends and relatives, and maybe friends of friends, which in a way is, let's say, the predecessor of what we're talking now. The big difference, though, that we do see is that the digital platforms have made the scale really much bigger and really has opened up the offer for the whole world. And it's very easy to come to a transaction. In most cases, we do think that the services offered are for benefit. So they are businesses and need to be recognized as such. You might have a category in between where people do offer it for a specific time of the year, for not many days, but except for the real sharing, I think a lot of it really enter into business. Well, when we think about what's the way forward, I think we need to recognize that traditions and regulations differ widely from destination to destination. We have destinations that have perfectly already incorporated a lot of the private offer. They gave me one time an example, if you build a house in a mountain area in Austria, what you will do is to build a few more rooms than you actually need for your family, because you want to have the opportunity to rent them out in the season. And there it's incorporated. A bed and breakfast is a very recognized category in all the Anglo-Saxon world. In Morocco, you do have riads, which is the typical traditional house, which is also used for tourism. In Cuba, you have casas particulares, where you also stay with people at home. We think it's very important to have a dialogue with all stakeholders. Well, a meeting like this today, I think it's very useful in that sense, just to get people to understand really what's going on. We do think that measurement and research to take informed and evidence-based decisions is really important, because we say a lot of things, but we often don't have that backed up by data. Are really the problems here in Barcelona, are they only caused by the private offer, or is there more at stake? I think the example Vincent Nijs gave about Bruges is a really good example of research that we need. And there's the element of rethinking of regulation. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need more. We already heard this morning we need smart regulation. I think important thing is it needs to be tailored to the new situation and proportionate to the scale of operation. Well, that's very much what I want to say as introduction. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, John. And John, the reason why you are a bird is because you have the bird view. So there are two persons in this, so neutral, independent bird view, and I will have a special question for you after. We are continuing with Denis. Denis Sparas is representing the European Commission DG Comp for competition, and what I like in Denis is working in a special unit called F1 for Formula One. So they are trying to do and to run as speed as the sharing economy is running. So, Denis, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Oliver, and thanks for belief that public administration can actually be as fast as markets are developing. First of all, I would really like to thank NECSTouR and Catalan government for this initiative. I think this workshop is very timely and discusses very important issue and very important market developments. I mean, the discussion showed that we do not necessarily always agree, but I think it's very important that we discuss which are the issues which are out there and how best to approach them. So I will just briefly focus at this stage on what we as DG Com, which is one of the directorates of the Commission, what is our focus of our work and our thinking on this specific issue. I mean, we were, as you can imagine, very closely involved in the overall Commission initiative on the communication on collaborative economy. So just very briefly on what we as DG Com do and what we are responsible for. Primarily, we are responsible for the application and the enforcement of EU competition rules. When we talk about EU competition rules, I mean mainly rules which are applicable to undertakings. So all the prohibitions of anti-competitive behavior in terms of abuse of market dominance or concluding agreements which would, have anti-competitive objects or effects, and by that exclude competitors from the market. One important thing I think in this regard to mention is the fact that we are part of European Competition Network, and we are one of the members of that network, and members of that network are also national competition authorities. And at the end of the previous session, we heard that the Spanish Competition Authority, for example, and it's not the only one, was very active in the area of collaborative economy. They prepared the report. There were some very interesting conclusions in that. And that's the second role which competition authorities in the EU have. It's not just the enforcement of the rules, but also advocacy role. So not to go too much into the whole enforcement, maybe just to briefly mention, when we are thinking about the collaborative economy, and I'm really now not going as far as maybe, saying all digital platforms, but really digital platforms we are talking when we are usually referring to collaborative economy, we did not identify any new specific, competition law issue. When we are thinking about collaborative economy and digital platforms especially, but also, underlying service providers, we see two possible angles of competition concerns. One would be that you already today have market-dominant players, you could call them incumbents, which would, engage in any form of anti-competitive behavior in order to keep, other competitors from the market. Not to name or shame anybody, but for example, one can imagine that taxi association would want to keep competing service providers outside the market, so they would conclude a specific type of agreement which would essentially prevent other market entrants to enter the market. The other type of foreclosure which we can see is where the state is essentially enabling this type of behavior by incumbents. A typical example would be state adopts a legislative solution or legislative measure which enables already dominant incumbents to essentially prevent new market entrants to enter the market. It can be on the level of the digital platform, it can be at the level of the service provision. But also one thing that shouldn't be forgotten is today we have innovators, we have digital platforms which are entering the market. We always say there is a lot of competition, but it may happen, and I think Olivier was already kind of alluding to this, that some of these innovators may become very big, and in the future they may actually be the ones that would have a market dominant position. I mean, of course, that as such is not prohibited, but it's important to keep in mind that they should not be engaging in any anti-competitive practices. What we see at this stage is that the competition law and the toolbox we have is sufficient to tackle issues which we may have out there on the market. So there is no need, at least on the competition law side, to really adopt any new type of rules to tackle issues that were identified here. This is on the enforcement side. There is also an important aspect, which is the advocacy side, where, if we think what national competition authorities especially are doing these days is looking at these markets, trying to show why, innovation is good for, quality, choice on the market, lower prices. And of course, there are some potential dangers in this, but I think it's important to keep in mind this advocacy role of regulators. And here again, national competition authorities like Spanish one, the UK one, Portuguese one, were very active in showing that the new market entrants are bringing benefits to the market, and that therefore we should think, what is the best possible way. And I think we have heard in the previous session, and I'm almost sure we will listen here, we are always very much talking when something new happens on the market, okay, do we need and how we need to regulate that? And I think Claudia was already alluding to that. Sometimes it's better to take a step back and to try to rethink, okay, what is the market situation? Which are the public policy objectives we really want to address, or whether there are any market failures, and see what would be the best way to address that. And in many cases, especially in a new market environment, it may be the case that the existing regulation would actually be identified as not fit for purpose, that we would need certain deregulation, but that of course doesn't mean that the new market entrants should be freely left without any regulation. There are still public service objectives like fiscal measures, social security, and other issues which of course need attention. But as I said, I'm sure we will discuss that in detail, so I would leave it here, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're now moving to one of our first guardian angels. So Ana Martinez Ribas, who is General Subdirector, Tourism Department in Catalan government. I think you started as a lawyer a few years ago, and now working particularly for addressing all the the sanctioning, the disciplinary actions, everything related to how to deal when something is going wrong. So if you are not happy with this conference, you just direct your email to Ana. Ana, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Yes, this one.
Molt bé. Bona tarda. Estic encantada en compartir amb tots vostès.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. And it's great to do it in this excellent Art Nouveau venue, the Sant Pau Hospital, built by Domènech and Montaner. So you shouldn't miss the visit to the gardens and the main building. So I'm innovating too, because a month ago I was appointed to my position. So I would like to talk about the issue of the responsibility of platforms. So to take up the challenge that the colleague from Airbnb mentioned, from the perspective of e-commerce regulation and sectorial tourism sectorial regulations. So I wondered, what do platforms do? What regulations are applicable? And what's their liability in these activities? So it's a service that's provided from IT services. It's remote. It's a profit-seeking activity, which is provided electronically, and which has a beneficiary in contrast to broadcasting, radio broadcasting. So among access to networks, those who provide IT, they would be in data hosting, which is providing the recipient of the service. So it's the owner of the housing, the one who wants to offer it to the market, and the one who's posting on the pages of the platforms. And in this service, it's also an active service for intermediation of tourism services. So what's the regulation which is applied? The e-commerce directive, its transposition to Spain, the law 34/2002, and in our case, law 13/2012 of tourism law of Catalonia for tourism subjects, with few obligations, as you'll see, but there's one which is essential. So regarding the law of information society, their responsibility would be based on being generically subject to civil administrative law. And regarding tourism law, they would be subject to an obligation, which is to register the tourism number of Catalonia, that all establishments have to have. The access to this number is quite simple. Any housing which has a certificate may carry out this activity, and it's just a simple communication to the municipal authorities. So now that we've seen the responsibility, depending on how the platform information is treated, they'll be at one level of responsibility or the other. If if they have a neutral treatment and passive treatment of information, they will just have responsibility when they know that they're producing an illicit act. But if they know about it, they'll be responsible. They'll be responsible of withdrawing data or preventing access to them. So treatment is neutral when it's automatic, passive, etc. On the other hand, if their character regarding the information which has been posted by the owner is not neutral, they'll have direct responsibility on the content if the content is not legal. So when does